Awesome. Great. Let's get started. Malo elele, noa ia, aloha mai e, whakalofa lahi atu, kamia mauri, kia orana, nisa bulavinaka, guditru, halo olaketa, iorana, talofa lava, kia ora, and warm Pasifika greetings to everyone who has joined us during their lunch to explore alcohol harm among our Pasifika young people. I'm just going to open us up with a lotu. So Heavenly Father, we are gathered here today as community members, parents, teachers, researchers, advisors, among other roles, because we want to support and find out what our young Pacific people need to thrive. I ask that you give us the strength to fully engage in today's presentation and Delanoa. And I'll just briefly introduce myself and then pass over to Jude. So koekulele mai me tongatapu, niutopu tapu, amonu shila, kongatiru nui ngarui hine whakatohea, topu iwi, ko hokuhingoa ko Tatiana, Kinfinau. I'm a part of the Youth 19 research kainga, as well as a PhD student doing queer Māori and Pasifika research at Te Hiringa Waka. And I'll pass over to Jude.
Thanks, Tatiana, for that beautiful opening. Kia orana, talofa lava. Welcome everyone to this webinar. We're here today to launch this, the latest and final fact sheet in our series on understanding and addressing alcohol harm. And this webinar and the fact sheet focus on findings for Pasifika adolescents. So thanks for coming along and joining us today. Tatiana is going to take us through the findings in a minute, and then we've got an amazing panel of experts to put the findings in context and have a discussion about what some of the solutions might be. So wherever we are, as Tatiana alluded to, wherever we are in the system, what can we do to make a difference? And finally, we'll have Q&A at the end. So if you have questions as we go, please feel free to put those in the chat as you think of them. And we'll have chance for discussion at the end. As we go through the presentation, there's no need to take lots of notes because all of the facts are in the fact sheet, which is available online right now. So because we've got quite a few people on the call today, we've got everyone on mute apart from the presenters. But when we get to the Q&A time, there will be an opportunity to have your voice heard or to put questions in the chat. So please do that anytime. So just before I hand over to Tatiana, just a little bit of background about this project. So the webinar and the fact sheet we're presenting today are part of a wider project about adolescent alcohol use and harm. And that project is a partnership between the Youth 2000 team, the Adolescent Health Research Group, which I'm also part of. I'm a researcher at the University of Otago in Wellington in the Public Health Department. And I've worked with Tatiana and others in the team to produce findings from the Youth 2000 series. So this is part of that. The project started just over a year ago when the Minister of Justice announced that there would be a review of the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act. We knew that there was going to be policy debate around alcohol control measures, so we wanted to make sure that the latest evidence was available in the public domain to inform those debates and also to support community action to reduce alcohol harm. So we're really grateful for funding from the NIB Foundation and Te Hiringa Hauora, who helped to make this happen by providing funding to let us analyse data that had been collected but not analysed. So the data comes from the Youth 2000 survey series, which is a high quality research survey undertaken in schools in 2001, 2007, 12 and 19. The first survey had about 10,000 participants, and there's been between 7 and 10,000 in each iteration. So each of them has a really good sample of Pasifika, which enables us to zoom in on what's going on for Pasifika, and even down to the level of what's going on for Samoan, Cook Island, Tongan and Niuean students. So you'll hear a bit more about that soon. just to acknowledge that there's been a big team effort, so huge thanks to the advisory group, a couple of whom are on the panel today, but the others who aren't, thank you as well. Thanks to the research team and analysts behind the scenes, particularly Jane Zhang, who's done all the number crunching. And thanks, of course, to the students and schools who were involved in the survey series, because we wouldn't have any data without them. So that's it from me. Oh no, I think I've got one more slide, just to highlight that the fact sheets are available online. Those are the web addresses there. So we've got a series of 7. Oh, could you advance, Tatiana? A series of 7. The first 4 are about secondary school students overall, and then we've got 3 fact sheets and webinars focusing on our priority groups. So Rangatahi Māori, Rainbow Adolescents, and now Pasifika Adolescents, which we're launching today. So please do check out those resources. I hope they'll be really useful for you and your mahi. So over to you, Tatiana.
Amazing, thank you, Jude. Let me click back on the slide. So to prevent alcohol harm among our Pasifika youth, it's important to understand the historical and current factors that influence that use. And our Pasifika communities in Aotearoa are rich, diverse, vibrant, lively, and complex. And though we share many values and stories across our Sea of Islands, we each have our own history, cultural practices, beliefs, values, as well as expectations around alcohol. And the photo in the top right is the Pacific Island Presbyterian Church in the 60s, based in Newton, Alkalani, the first Pasifika church in Aotearoa. As we know, churches are central to community life, mental health, and values, among other things. And though there's a range of influences on alcohol use and harm, church tends to, discourage this. But alcohol use can also be a symptom of broader social issues. And we know that across the moana, it's very common for households to be multi-generational and have ainga and kainga close by. However, here in colonial NZ, our average house is not conducive to having our families live together like this, all of as close as they used to be, which can affect young people directly or impact on kainga well-being. As well as things like the neighborhood environment, which has an influence on alcohol use and harm for our young people. In our Pasifika ainga often live in areas that are oversaturated with places that sell alcohol. In 2018, the study by Chambers and colleagues found that Pasifika children had high exposure to alcohol marketing, almost 7 times a day on average, which was significantly higher than for New Zealand Europeans. And the major marketing mediums were sports sponsorships, shopfront signages, as well as merchandise. So I'm just going to share some of the main findings of this work. However, more detail can be found in those fact sheets and reports that Jude talked about, which are available on the Youth 19 website. So this is just an overview of the Youth 2000 demographics. And across the time points, we see that the number of schools who participate in the survey, there was a decrease because we restricted to Northland, Auckland, and Waikato in 2019. However, Pasifika participation remained relatively stable, 13% in 2007, 17% in 2012, and most recently 15% in 2019. So more and more Pasifika students are opting to not drink alcohol. And the decline in alcohol use among students is great, because the younger that you are when you start drinking heavily, the more likely you are to experience those kind of immediate and long-term harms. And so we focus on this age group because they are, because though they are less likely to drink, those that do are at greater risk of harm. And so this is because this is such an important period of time for brain development, and the way drinking occurs and in what setting also has an impact on the risk of harm. And these harms can have a lifelong impact. So in a similar trend to the previous slide, where an increasing proportion of Pasifika youth reported that they had never drunk alcohol, an increasing proportion are drinking less frequently. Or in other words, fewer young people are drinking frequently. Despite this though, binge drinking remains quite high among our young people. And of the Pasifika young people who said that they currently drank alcohol, 1 in 3 reported having 10 or more drinks on a typical occasion. And Pasifika were 4 times as likely to drink at this level than non-Māori, non-Pasifika. So although the prevalence and frequency of drinking has declined over time, the typical quantity hasn't. We also see some differences across ethnicity, with drinking lower in Samoan students than students from the Cook Islands, Tonga, or Niue, which as mentioned before is potentially a reflection of our those kind of differing environments or beliefs and attitudes around alcohol. And just to preface this slide, questions about alcohol harm weren't asked in 2019, so this data is from 2012. And I'll just kind of talk to the blue column, which represents our Pasifika students. But you can see how this compares to non-Māori, non-Pasifika in the orange. So quite a number of our young Pasifika are experiencing harm as a result of alcohol. Things like, doing things that could get them into trouble, unprotected sex, injury, as well as school and work being affected. And so based off that graph, that data, I looked at how much harm alcohol caused to people who drink currently. And using a scale where a score of 1 was given if the harm happened more than a year ago, 2 if it happened once or twice in the past year, and 3 if it happened 3 or more times in the past year. So using logistic regression, we looked at why there was a difference in alcohol harm between Pasifika and non-Māori, non-Pasifika. So even after considering the effect of neighborhood deprivation, the difference was still significant. And it was found that the main reason for this difference was the drinking patterns. So that was around Pasifika young people tending to consume higher quantities. But neighborhood deprivation still played a role in this difference. And when looking at the total population, these were some of the determinants of alcohol harm. So intuitively, the frequency of drinking, the quantity, but as well as things like being young, being a girl, were also associated with higher alcohol harm, as well as the environment that young people are drinking in. So if parents are kind of present, the ease of access to alcohol, and the kind of norms around drinking. So how are our young Pasifika people accessing alcohol? There's a range of sources, with the top 3 sources including friends, parents, and having someone else buy it for them. However, Pasifika young people are much less likely to be given alcohol by their parents than non-Māori, non-Pasifika. And just as a side note, students could choose multiple answers to this, so the sum of all these is over 100%. I just have a couple more slides left. This one, an odds ratio was calculated, so comparing Pasifika to non-Māori, non-Pasifika, exploring the risk factors for high risk drinking. And these were also adjusted for age, sex, and neighborhood deprivation. So for example, in the first line, for Pasifika who had experienced ethnic discrimination by a teacher, police officer, or health professional in the last year, the odds of high-risk drinking were 2.73 times higher than Pasifika who had not experienced such discrimination. So the higher the odds ratio, the stronger the association with risky drinking. And we see for most risk factors, Pasifika are more likely to experience the risk factor than for non-Māori, non-Pasifika, which also links back to those historical and contemporary injustices and inequalities that we touched on earlier. And young people with these risk factors, OT involvement, experience of sexual abuse, witnessing violence or being hit, are more likely to engage in high-risk drinking. So that could be higher quantities and or frequency. And in this slide, we're looking at what factors protect or reduce the likelihood of high-risk drinking. So most Pasifika youth have a whole range of protective factors in their lives. Young people who get enough quality time with their kainga, have faith in spiritual beliefs that are important, know about their culture, feel safe at home and school. They're more likely to be non-drinkers or drink small quantities infrequently. So to sum it all up, there are encouraging trends regarding the prevalence. However, data since 2019 suggests that youth drinking may be increasing again. And most students don't drink, but those who do tend to do so in large quantities. And there are many protective factors, but also risk factors that are pervasive. And there are also some ethnic differences across these drinking patterns. And lastly, our community already has the solutions. If we looked at the protective factors, so many of them revolved around community, home, family, though we do need a system that supports by, with, and for Pasifika. Malo Alpito, I'll hand over to Jude now.
Thanks so much, Tatiana. That was an excellent summary. If you would just go to the next slide, please. So now we're going to move on to our panel discussion. We will have a chance to hear from some leading experts in this field about what we can do to make a difference and to understand in a deeper way what's going on. So you're welcome to ask questions at any time in the chat. And as I said, we'll have a proper Q&A at the end, but do pop your questions in the chat as you think of them. So we've got 4 wonderful panelists, Tatiana, who you've already met. I'll just ask the other panelists to just quickly introduce themselves. So Louisa, you're first on my screen.
Talofa lava, kia ora koutou. My name is Louisa. I'm Afakasi Samoan European, and I've worked in the alcohol space for 10 years now.
So Louisa hails from Auckland, and she is a program manager for the Alcohol Harm Minimisation Program at what used to be Counties Manukau. Philip, you're next on my screen.
Oh, malo lava le sui flua. My name's Phil Siatanga. I'm almost 60, so I think I'm the oldest on the panel. But I've been in the field for 3 decades in a number of roles: social worker, youth worker, health promoter, clinician, and still doing all of those things, and social scientist with a Pasifika lens. Yeah, and the proud dad of 2 grown-up daughters who have managed to avoid the struggles of addiction. So I'm very proud of them.
Thanks, Philip. Yeah, Philip doesn't need much introduction. He's been a leader in this field for decades. Annabelle, would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Jude. Kura talofa lava, ko Annabelle Prescott, Takuingoa. I am Indigenous to the Pacific and have Samoan, Māori and European whakapapa, and I have spent the last 20 years, not quite as long as Philip, in this sector of youth health and youth development, with a particular focus on addictions and mental health. So it's a pleasure to be here today. Thanks.
Thank you all for joining us. So we're lucky to have the expertise in the room to really discuss this topic in depth. Could I ask you to stop sharing, Tatiana, so we can have people's faces a bit bigger? So we got to think about what's going on at lots of different levels, and starting with thinking about that household ainga kainga level. So if I start with you, Tatiana, what do you feel like are the solutions, or what needs to happen at that ainga kainga level to really support young people?
I think, like I was just mentioning towards the end, that so many of those protective factors actually feature ainga, kainga. So I think, in a way that families, can help their young people be at lesser risk of harm is to literally kind of, be able to be there, spend time, have fun, go to the beach, hold fast to, culture in the household. I guess, having that interest in what your young people are doing, who they're with, as well as that safe space so young people can be themselves, share their feelings, and can talk about alcohol, and if/when drinking occurs, what that might look like and how that can happen safely. Those kind of harm reduction strategies. Like being supervised, drinking water, drinking lower quantities. But I think it's also easier to provide that present, loving home environment when there's basic needs are being met, like things like adequate housing, income that allows family time and fun time, and having spaces that are inclusive and culturally safe. So I think also, as well as those kind of the spending time and quality time, but having the policy change to support that and address those environmental factors.
Thanks, Tatiana. So there's things that families can do, but then there's things that government and organisations can do to support families to be in that space. Thank you. Any of our other panelists, is there anything you'd like to add? Just indicate. No? Yes, Philip, please.
I'm just thinking about how parents hold the conversation with their children, and it's often an awkward one, or it's a conversation that's not held. So it's only really recently that guidelines for to help parents have those conversations. And the dynamic of whānau, it's, you've got blended families, where maybe their child in one child, older sibling is drinking, providing alcohol to a child from the other parent. There's complexities in that, but there are some really useful things that people can do around managing that space in a way that really doesn't diminish young people's well-being. And I guess for me, there's just this really simple idea around that, which is, if we're going to bring in instruction rather than a hardline discipline, just say no. We're going to bring commend, always affirm, recommend, make the instruction a recommendation, and then commend again. And parents, we all have that responsibility to establish those boundaries and take the lead in that conversation. But there are some good guidelines available. I mean, if we get the opportunity later on, we can talk about how we encourage that home partnership conversation and with schools as well. But if we don't, that's okay. Yeah.
Thanks, Philip. And if people know of great resources that they'd like to share with others, just please do go ahead and pop them in the chat, and we can share the chat afterwards, or people can jot them down now. Okay, so moving on to think about the community setting, and we're thinking broadly here about, for example, the church setting. It could be about the physical environment or the commercial environment in the neighbourhood, exposure to advertising and so on. What needs to happen at that community level. And Louisa, I'm going to go to you first.
I hope you mean the policy level. Or do you want to go back over to community?
Yeah, sorry, I've got that wrong. Yeah, let's go back to the community level. I realized I skipped to level 2, but we'll go back. So Philip, you were going to speak first about the community level, what we need at that community level to really make a difference.
Oh, heck, I could say so much on that. I might follow Louisa. I mean, I will go off on all sorts of tangents around that, you know.
What's the one thing that you would most want to say?
Okay, well, I've spent my life in the community level and the NGO space. And so I think there's a whole lot of work that in terms of trusting our communities who want better to hold the conversations. And so the health promotion space could be so much better resourced in terms of feet on the ground with the right information and the right engagement approaches across our communities, you know. It's still, our workforces are still very, very small, even in the addiction and the mental health spaces. We have, you know, we're being culturally loaded a lot, and we could do a lot more with a lot more, I'm telling you. You know,
we saw with the COVID rollout what communities can do when resourced.
Exactly. We have the networks, we have the key relationships. I don't know if we have the full confidence yet of some of those people who are in the funding and decision-making systems that resource us, but we're getting there, you know. I think there is progress, at least without going into depth around why I say that. I think there is progress. Here's hope.
More advocacy.
Order, man. It's we're heading somewhere better. Yeah. Sorry, Louisa.
Yeah. Okay. Louisa, anything you would add at that community level?
I mean, this is very well known to everybody here in the webinar, just around having those community-based rangatahi initiatives that employ or are led or partnered with the very young people that these initiatives are for. So kind of health providers resource a gap, but taking that step back. And there are some initiatives like Unfold that are really good examples of showing this. And just providing that resourcing again to commissioning Pacific specific providers as well. So community champions and spokespeople as well. You know, we're not alone, and just working together as a community to be able to support a healthier community is really important, and utilizing our churches and our church ministers that there is a role for them to play in being able to kind of protect the community for things like alcohol.
Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about the school level, because school is a really crucial setting for adolescents, obviously, and Annabelle's got a lot of expertise in that area. So Annabelle, do you want to talk a little bit about what should be happening in schools?
Awesome. Yeah, sure. I'm a little bit like Philip and probably need some containment around all the ideas and solutions that I have. But I think, firstly, I thought I'd start a bit of a corridor outwards and then move inwards to some more micro, tangible things that can happen within the school environment. But I wanted to pick up really on the finding around 80% of Pasifika young people reporting they feel safe and connected to school, but also the undertone or the other finding around Pasifika young people experiencing racism within the school environment. And I think that what's really important and a tangible and actionable way of starting to address structural racism within the education system is for Pasifika whānau, their first point of engagement with the school system is a positive one. often as Pasifika, our first engagement with the school is because our kids being the one that's having a more violent response from the education system than their Palangi counterparts, and we get contacted at that point. So I would be encouraging the first kind of point of contact to be around how awesome their young person is, what a positive contribution they're making to the school community. And I think this would go a long way in terms of rebuilding trust and rebuilding relationship between the Pasifika community, whānau, and the education system. So that's kind of one thing. And then I think the other piece that is related to this is schools are required to do a health consultation process with their community. And actually we see a really low, and for someone like me in my role, a devastating level of engagement in the consultation process. And what that means is that voices aren't heard, so schools can't then respond to actually what the needs and the expectations are of the community. But that does fall back to the relationship from a Pasifika perspective around structural racism and lack of trust. So we need to do some repair there before we actually load expectations onto some of the more micro aspects that we would like to see happen. So that's kind of my first starting point in my long list, Jude, for you.
And so another question, I mean, as a country, we're kind of moving away from a sort of punitive approach to drugs,
Yes.
and including alcohol and that, to a health-based approach. So what does that look like in a school setting?
Well, I think, again, we need to be multifaceted in what our approach looks like. I think we need to be ensuring that we have robust policies that engage the voice of Pasifika young people and the development of both the policy and the procedures, so young people know actually what the support is available and can co-create what the expectations they have of the school in regards to helping them if they do hit a speed bump. So I think that's one aspect. I think we need a curriculum response that looks at developing competencies and health-based competencies that don't necessarily target old school kind of facts and effects and here's all the harms if you use these drugs, but are actually developing rangatahi competencies that are transferable across all areas of youth health and their decision making. And I think we really need to support teachers and the wider community to be able to have a conversation with young people and just be able to go, hey, I noticed that you're never at school after lunch. Is everything all right with you? I feel we've got an as a response to the destigmatization and the normalization of the mental health space, we've, as adults in the world, and particularly in the school setting, we've actually gotten nervous about asking questions because we don't know where that will lead. And so simply asking a young person, are you okay? I think we need to kind of re-emphasize the importance of that and re-emphasize the importance of connectedness and that sense that adults care in tangible ways.
And I think this research really underlines the fact that drinking is often a reaction to, or a way of coping with difficult emotions.
100%.
Would like to add in the school space? Yep, Philip, go.
Well, I won't take too long, but one of the challenges of being an external provider and taking projects into schools, and every school is its own little village, is the buy-in by the leadership. And so often, you know, people do health days, which is just often just a simple awareness raising thing, but other programs that are designed to actually work relationally and engage students take time and require not just resource, but a whole year. And we talk a lot about whole school approaches. There's a lot of rhetoric, but very, very difficult if there isn't the parental buy-in, the governance buy-in, and the principal's full attention to making a point of focus. So I often think the big challenges in the schools really comes at a leadership level. Are they going to call it an issue of priority and then work through the time it takes? And just as a simple example, I was asked by a nurse in one of the schools, low decile area, high Māori, high Pasifika, to come in and start talking with them about an alcohol policy. They eventually got one, but the principal was not community minded. And so he had a set of drivers. And what he did was, unbeknown, I didn't know what to expect, but he pulled everybody in to the hall and expected a policy to come out of a conversation, 2 conversations. And so that's really not what we're talking about when we're saying whole school buy-in. We're actually saying how can we encourage parents who are giving a certain amount of guardianship of their children to a school environment, to provoke, if you like, or to ask the questions that need to be asked of the school in terms of how they're looking after the whole health and well-being of their kids coming through. So we've got really good resources. We just don't have enough people to do sort of like a scale up across the secondary school community, But there's some really neat things that are beginning to develop in schools around mental health curriculum and education, and we do need to make it a curriculum issue. Yeah, but one that deals with the whole person, not just the issue of alcohol and drugs. It's a whole person approach within a whole school context. Yeah.
They're really embedding in the school.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no quick answers there, and those kind of relational whole school approaches take time.
Yeah.
Okay, finally, we will move on to the biggest picture, thinking about the policy environment, so especially what's going on nationally, but also in local government. So Louisa, would you like to start us off on that conversation?
Thank you, Jude. You would have heard through Tatiana's discussion around healthier environments and how important that is needed for healthier communities. So, less bottle stores or less visible marketing, advertising in the environment, as an example. There are currently 2 amendment bills going through Parliament at the moment. Both of them actually seeking to remove the appeals process, and one of them going further to also remove sports sponsorship of broadcast sports. And while the consultations for this are closed, but oral submissions are being heard, it's so topical, it's so important that our Pacific communities at the whānau school and community levels are really visible and mobilised to have your voices kind of heard in this process really publicly. There is a potential for a second part of the bill to come up for consultation next month, which I totally encourage everybody watching this to be a part of, because these policy windows are very far and few. And this is a real opportunity to be able to really build an environment for our future, for our children as well. Also, just around the policy and local governments, around the alcohol industry's role in this as well, and just pushing back on that they do not have a place or a role in making decisions for our families or in our health, for our health, and just making noise about, because they do sit at a government level and are able to input into decisions, following on from tobacco and learning from tobacco and not allowing their voice to be present in the policy making decisions, and also just that coordinated response across all the sectors. So thinking about education, health, social development, and other national strategies and policies, if we think about the impact of suicide over our Pacific whānau, and alcohol-related suicides are highest in Pacific. However, the Ministry of Health Suicide Prevention Action Plan does not include alcohol in there. So it's just really been visible that actually this is something that is so important if we want to achieve equity and maximise health gains for our people.
Thank you so much, Louisa. I mean, we've had multiple government commissioned reports going back to the Law Commission review more than 10 years ago, recommending major changes, and just seen so little action, which is frustrating. Would any of our other panelists like to comment on that big picture policy level? Tatiana? You talked earlier about determinants of health. What would you like to see in terms of supporting Pasifika and removing some of the barriers to Pasifika success?
I think this is definitely an overall, but just, I mean, housing, like the right to housing, and having it not be such a, I guess it's often a really stressful time for families, especially when having to move, and so I think having a process that's that is more straightforward, and more just in general, having culturally safe and environments, and as well as things like, I guess, workers' rights. So I think, often our families are having to work really long hours or multiple days, and that really takes away from being able to spend that time with family. So having those kinds of safeguards in place that will have those kind of flow-on effects for mental well-being, for our young people.
Thanks, Tatiana. And I guess it's something that we can all do, no matter where we are in the system, is to, chat to your local MP or write a letter to your local MP saying that you support alcohol reform, that you support better housing initiatives, or whatever the issue is that matters to you. That's what the MPs are there for. We can pressure them to make change. Philip, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, it is a bit of a David and Goliath. I mean, they have the industry has huge influence in lobbying, and I totally agree. I'm 100% behind not having their voice in certain places, eclipsing the voice of our communities. So we, Mapamaya in the House, we did get our submission in, Louisa, on the. Yes. I'd encourage all providers to get engaged in that process. Let's have our voice heard. Yeah.
Great. Well, let's move on to the Q&A part of this session. So please pop any questions in the chat, and we've got a couple already to get us started in comments. So Jordan Johnston says, in relation to suicide and alcohol, there's an opportunity with the Suicide Prevention Office at the moment, refreshing the strategic action plan. So an opportunity to advocate there for an alcohol focus. Thanks, Jordan. Thanks to those who have popped resources and links in the chat. That's super helpful. Just see. So one question from Amanda Jones, who wonders, is there something you would have loved to look at with this data, but just weren't able to, perhaps because the sample size wasn't big enough, or you could have looked, or maybe there were questions that you wished were in the survey but weren't? Any thoughts there about what we still don't know? I mean, something that struck me is we saw quite a big difference between Samoan and other Pacific ethnicities. So I don't know if any of our panelists could comment on the possible reasons for that, but that's something we certainly can't answer with the data we've got. And I think it would be helpful to understand what's going on there. So any thoughts about what is going on there? Educated guesses?
That deserves another webinar, that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. But it does bring to the fore, you know, our diversity, eh? You know, I work as a Samoan Awhakasi counsellor, but I'm very aware, alongside Tongan colleagues, we know what we have a certain understanding of how to approach what we don't know about people who are culturally socialized differently, you know, and we do that with cultural humility, but it's a whole webinar. Good question.
Yeah.
My thing would be around what I would have liked to be able to draw more on is the relationship between dads and sons and alcohol. Yeah. You know, just a genuine question.
Do you want to say a little bit more about that, Philip?
Yeah, I work with a lot of fathers in various kinds of distress. And, you know, often alcohol related and drug related and what have you. Often the conversation will revolve at some point about who's most important to you, and they will always talk, and we'll start the conversation around their children, not just the example they're setting and the regrets that they have, maybe about their own behaviour. Oh, here's a tip: if people are drinking with children, there's a thing around exposure. Try not to drink in front of your kids. Find somewhere else to do it, you know. And I'm not judging, I'm not moralizing, but it's really important to set a different kind of example. And there's that line that we do. See, I'm getting into it now. I'm going off on my tangent, but you know, you have a bad day. Oh, I really need a drink. You know, watch the language that we're putting out, because it's sowing a normalization message and around alcohol as a solution. I mean, it is, some people are self-medicating just to get through the day. I understand that, but at the same time, it is a toxin and a poison. I mean, it's the massive organ, our liver, our friendly liver, has to metabolize it and turn it into acetate, but it's not going to get it all. And by the time it's running into our bloodstream, you know, it's headed for this space, and where all our impaired judgment and silly talk is going to come, and a lot of the hurt and harm comes out of that. But for dads, I think it's a special kind of support that they need, and especially if you've grown up like I did. If you've grown up in the kind of masculinity culture where you don't really talk, you know, and you learn by observing the drinking behaviors of others around you. And there's a common feature of insecurity in men, you know, who may appear to be successful in other places in life, but are really socially insecure. It's surprising how many men I talk to about what's driving them to drink. Yeah. So if we can build, why I say this, it comes back, it's developmentally, comes back to the more that we can build and install within boys, you know, or children, an intrinsic sense of self-worth earlier, the more likely they are to be able to resist the kind of peer pressure that goes on in that other socialization spaces when they're leaving school. Yeah, the more likely they're equipped to resist the temptation that comes with a lot of the peer pressure, you know, when you're hitting 15, 16, 17. I've said a lot.
Thank-
Yeah, I will. I will.
Thanks, Philip.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your wisdom with us. We have a question, and perhaps Annabelle could answer this. Are there some efforts being made in the education sector, for example, to empower young people where to direct a friend for help?
Yeah,
Annabelle, are you able to comment on that?
sure. Hey, thanks for that question, Murray. That's a really great question. And I think, firstly, what I'd like to say is that education is really working hard in this space. They've recently released mental health guidelines, and they're in the process of developing a suite of lesson plans and ways to facilitate and deepen understanding around wellbeing and mental health broadly. What I think is really important, and thanks, Kim, for putting your comment in the chat as well. I think what's important is we look to find ways to enhance the relationship between health and education. Education has a specific role, and we've got to be mindful not to overburden them. Teachers are trained to be teachers, and for the most part, I want to go in with the assumption that they are amazing at their teaching job, but they aren't health professionals. So our answer is, our solution is in enhancing the relationship between health and education, deepen the understanding in each sector of each other, so thoughts and ideas aren't lost in translation. And it's in this partnership and deep partnership. I'm not talking about health providers going in and doing a one-off stand-up rah-rah in assembly, because we know that that has no evidence base to it whatsoever, but a systemic response between a health provider and schools within their community is what the solution is to this space. And that also creates an ease of access for young people to then access help when and if they do hit a speed bump. So that's my whakaaro around your question.
Thanks, Annabelle. Anything, any other panelists would like to add? All right. Thank you.
I think I would add one thing. Sorry,
Yep.
Jude.
Yeah.
And this is just because I'm all up in dealing with a tween. So aroha mai for my projection. But what we haven't talked about is the parental monitoring piece. And I do feel like that is a key protective factor that helps navigate the relationship between the school community, between the young person's relationship with their whānau, and I would just encourage parents that monitoring isn't a dirty word or a dirty term, that it is actually demonstrating that you care for your young person. It's fraught with tension, as my lived experience is telling me, but it is part of the key indicator of a caring parent is that, and help support that relationship between school and parents as well. So sorry, I just wanted to pick up on that.
That's a great point, Annabelle. And there's so much strong evidence about parental monitoring being a really key protective factor, including in this research. And this fact sheet shows that Pasifika families are almost all, keeping a really close eye on their young ones. So it is it's a strength of Pasifika families. Well, I'm aware that we're kind of reaching the end of our time together, and I thank everyone so much for sharing your comments and resources and suggestions in the chat for others to pick up on. Before we close up, I'd just like to go to each of our panelists and ask them if there's just one message that you want people to take away with them today. What is it? So just in a sentence, if you can. Louisa, can I start with you?
Okay, super long sentence. So just a comprehensive coordinated action across all levels, those safe, age-appropriate korero around those taboo conversations, racism, consent. My young one's 3 years old. I've started doing that. The importance of delaying alcohol use until 18 and then moving away from burdening individuals to make healthier decisions and really putting the energy into putting pressure on the government.
Yeah. Making the healthy choice the easy choice, right? Tatiana, what's your final word?
I guess what I would love to see for our kainga and ainga is having the courage to have those taboo conversations. And I think that in this context with alcohol, it's, it could completely change. I mean, we were talking about how the context also plays a huge role in reducing harm. So even what Philip was saying about that exposure, minimizing that exposure, I think that's my run-off sentence.
Thanks, Tatiana. Philip, what's your one sentence takeaway?
Oh, okay. It's a long sentence. It's the longest sentence than Louise's. Yeah, just picking up on the exposure point, and the bit that we didn't touch on with sports, and we kind of mentioned it. The psychological point of exposure is that it's a powerful influence on developing young people's behavior, and sports sponsorship plays a part in that. And so people wearing and branding, and young people, especially impressionable young people or young men, perhaps, or young women, are reading a message. They're getting a message. And so the more we can do to limit that exposure, the more likelihood we're going to denormalize the popular culture's approach to drinking. Drinking is not, one of the messages for me is it's not as great as it pretends to be. The whole party culture and being exhilarated is a contour to that. And it's really not that great. It's not the better life.
Thanks, Philip. And Annabelle, the last word is with you.
So my word would be to talanoa with your young person and with their school and with your community to activate and advocate, and to ensure that schools prioritise addressing the barriers for our Pasifika young people to experience success.
Thank you, Annabelle. And I sure I speak for everyone here when I say a huge thank you to our 4 panelists who shared with us not only their expertise and work experience, but also from their hearts and wisdom. So thank you so much. I'll leave it to Tatiana. Can I hand over to you to close us off?
Yes, thank you, Lord, for bringing us all together, sharing this space, having this talanoa. I pray that you grant us the bravery to utilize these findings outside of these pages and outside of the space, and that you grant everyone a safe and gentle passage throughout the rest of the day. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. And thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.